I became a renter for the first time in my mid-30s, pretty late in life. Before that, I'd been on the other side of things. I'm a landlord and developer, which I realize doesn't endear me to most readers, but in my partial defense, I built everything that I own, and with my own hands for the first few years. I started doing painting, finishing carpentry, millwork, cabinet making to make money during university, and when I graduated I had saved up enough to get horribly into debt at an extremely high interest rate which I had to build my way out of. The first place I lived in after the dorm was a dangerously neglected warehouse that I had just bought, and ended up reconstructing into a fourplex. I lived there for the next 10 years while subsequently getting into new greenfield rental developments. Just before COVID I ended up selling that first place I had built, and the buyer wanted me out so they could raise the rent to market. This was to be my first time getting evicted, but the pain was numbed by the sale price during that huge market run-up. I also thought it might be tricky to navigate being a tenant in a building that I had built and owned for years. I decided to treat myself by renting a condo downtown, a huge step up from my previous one-bedroom that was chosen for its ROI rather than owner-occupancy appeal. I spent around 3 months looking at dozens of places and built up a good sense of the rental market as my pride insisted I get the best deal possible. I quickly learned that the market that had been so favorable to me, the landlord, was extremely difficult for me, the tenant. I got incredibly lucky when I took a chance and viewed a condo on Craigslist that had no photos in the listing, never a good sign. It turned out the lack of photos was not an attempt to cover up, but simply the inability of the owner to work a digital camera. He did not have a smartphone. It was perfect 2005-ish building, floor-to-ceiling glass, high floor with 270-degree views, AC, open layout, well-priced. The only problem? Very worn out, shabby 2005-ish kitchen and bathroom, and the reddest-looking cherry wood flooring you could imagine. Horrible cheap honey-colored fake wood veneer cabinets, gloss black appliances. Brushed aluminum finish everywhere, lots of frosted glass on the light fixtures. A simpler time. The landlord seemed like he would be pretty hands-off, and my application pitch was that if he was okay with it, I would take care of maintenance myself and just transfer him rent every month and not bother him. He loved the sound of that. He said he had bought a house in the suburbs and wanted to keep this condo for rental income for about 10 years until he retired. There are pretty strong tenant rights where I live, so long as he didn't sell there were no fault eviction options. We signed the tenancy agreement, paid the deposit and moved in. The last time I saw him was during the move-in inspection, after which he exclaimed, "If you treat this place well, I promise you can stay here as long as you want." Big, firm, job interview-winning boomer handshake, and he was gone. We loved the new place, a complete change from the up-and-coming part of town we had just left, 400 feet above the street. The absolutely horrible kitchen, bathrooms and floors haunted me, but I had a plan and it was only a matter of time. One of my carpentry, millwork subs did a lot of retail tenant improvement as well as model homes and apartments for much bigger developers. When you are building a 30-story high-rise, you typically spend a few $100,000 to several million mocking up a unit in a retail showroom somewhere off-site to help you collect deposits. After the building sells out, that stuff gets either junked or sold on Craigslist. When I was doing single-digit unit buildings, I had bought a number of new old stock appliances, cabinets, flooring etc. out of a marketing manager's garage for cash. A few months later and it's the summer of 2020 and COVID is in full swing, and my carpenter emails me. One of his clients is canceling their project, and since they are ghosting him on his draw, he is taking down their display unit. The drawings show an almost exact match to my unit in terms of dimensions. The spec sheet is jaw-dropping, almost 20 feet of Snidero cabinets, gloss white with champagne bronze hardware, Sub-Zero, Wolf appliance package, white marble counters and backsplash, Callista faucets. Easily $100,000 plus retail not including install. Oh, and 1,200 square feet of herringbone light oak planks if I don't mind pulling them up myself. How much does he want? $10,000 cash. Well, my job site is shut down for the foreseeable future. The government is making 75% of my payroll and I don't have anything to do except stare at my awful kitchen all day. After about 3 hours with my measuring tape and pencil, I ask my carpenter if he is willing to join my bubble for $40 per hour cash for a few weekends. He is. One last step. Email my landlord and ask if he doesn't mind me doing a complete renovation on his condo. Crucially, I conclude the offer with, I'll undertake to return it to move-in condition before I leave. Not surprisingly, he accepts. That's okay, do whatever you want. We love having you as a tenant. Time to go to work. I get the old kitchen out in about 2 days, hampered by my need to work quietly as I'm doing this without permits. Not like they are doing inspections anyways, but still. A side effect of this slow pace, and my wife's current obsession with Marie Kondo, is that everything is removed intact, and carefully taped and labeled. Taking out the old kitchen does indeed spark joy. The old floating cherry wood floor comes up in a morning, also tagged and labeled and bundled in the order it was removed. The carpenter comes over, and he gets the new kitchen installed in less than 2 days while I lay down the floor. The floor actually ended up taking me a week, mainly because I had to make the end cuts at my storage unit across town, since I definitely couldn't run a miter saw with everyone at home during lockdown. After just under 2 weeks, I had effectively a brand new, ultra high-end condo for just under $12,000 out of pocket. At this point I'm sure everyone reading this is facepalming as they wonder why on earth I'm proud of renovating someone else's condo at my cost. It did make sense at the time, as I was under the impression I'd be there for a good 10 years. Plus the fact I was paying about $500 per month under market at move-in, and more like $1,500 per month under market in the current condition. There are a variety of economic and market conditions and segments where it makes more financial sense to rent than it does to buy. For example, my monthly rent would not have even covered the interest portion of a mortgage, let alone condo fees, insurance, taxes and the opportunity cost of the down payment. In other words, it was cheaper to rent the condo than it was to rent the money that I would need to buy the condo. Also, as a builder, cash is a critical tool, and the more cash I can hold onto, the bigger I can build. With my 1-year lease and the fact I had lots of free time, it didn't seem like such a reckless move. And who can say no to a $2,000 kitchen faucet? Filling a glass of water feels like working the bolt on a well-oiled Holland & Holland rifle. Worst case I could probably get most of it back by selling just the appliances if something unexpected happened. Which it did. I had undertaken all this after evaluating all the possibilities and weighing the risk of putting time and money into a place I don't own. I had failed to consider one important detail, the wife. By the spring of 2023 the upgrades had, in my opinion, paid for themselves after nearly 36 months of use. I hadn't seen the landlord since I moved in and he hadn't been in touch since approving my renovation except for the monthly confirmation he'd accepted my rent transfer. So naturally I began to get concerned when by the end of the first week of May, he hadn't deposited my rent. 2 emails went unanswered, until there was a knock on the door. I opened up and was hit with a wall of flowery perfume, which perfectly matched the wall of floral print and red heels standing in my doorway. The landlord had contracted COVID, in 2023, and sent his wife to collect the rent. I get out my phone to cancel the transfer and go into my office to look for my checkbook. I come back to find her, still in her heels, standing in the middle of the living room spinning like a Technicolor top. Oh wow, this looks fabulous. I heard you were doing some renos but I never thought it would look like this. Is that a Sub-Zero fridge? She opens the fridge. My fridge. I lube the floors. And are these custom cabinets? She turns the kitchen faucet on and off probably 6 times. It took days to air out the smell of perfume after she left. Several hours later my wife came home, and given the lingering smell in the apartment, I'd already briefed her on who had stopped by. Fuck, I can tell by the smell she's seeing $signs. Sure enough, 3 weeks later I get a call from a realtor who wants to schedule the photographer to take listing photos as the landlords are selling. Of course the landlord, who has now recovered from his COVID, will not take my calls and won't respond to my emails. I'm upset that he doesn't have the courage to admit what he is doing. My wife is upset because she doesn't want to move, and I'm feeling embarrassed that I trusted this guy. I'm not really losing much since we've lived there for 3 years and paid tens of thousands less than market rent during that time, but it still stings. Even in the slow market the place sells in 3 weeks and yes, the new owners want to move in. They give me the required 3 months notice and pay the 1-month rent compensation. I note that the listing has advertised, exquisitely renovated with top-of-the-line appliances, cabinets and built-ins. No expense spared. My first instinct was to at least contact the realtor and suggest he check with the landlord about what was included with the apartment, and what was being represented, but the description in the listing infuriated my wife to such an extent that we agreed to let them do their own due diligence. I think you can all guess where this is going. This time it only took 3 days to pull the new kitchen out and put the old kitchen back in. Same with the floors. Turns out you can lay 1,000 square feet of flooring in about 2 hours if it's all pre-cut and labeled. But some of the T&G was a bit loose, so I made sure to glue that bitch down to the concrete nice and tight to make sure it doesn't creak or pop. It's exceptionally cheap, so it's going to splinter and separate if it ever needs to come back up. The old Home Depot Glacier Bay $49 kitchen faucet unfortunately started leaking when I put it back in, so I treated the new owners to a brand new replacement, now $60. The new one leaked as well, but not much, and only when it was on. I re-watched the move-in inspection video to refresh my memory and made sure everything was exactly as it was when I moved in, right down to a few small holes in the drywall. I had also forgotten that the old oven control board was fried, which meant it kept shutting off every 10 minutes. My wife and I debated leaving a wireless camera up on the wall to capture the new owner's delight at how faithfully we upheld our tenancy agreement, as unfortunately we moved out about a week before their planned move-in date, but there still a reasonable chance of getting sued, so we opted not to, as intent is half the battle. I don't actually know what happened, since I've ignored the dozens of phone calls from the landlord and the new owners, and just sent them a registered letter with my tenancy agreement, move-in inspection video on DVD, and a copy of the email exchange with the landlord from 2020 where he allowed me to renovate the condo provided I put everything back the way it was when I moved in. I did get a text from the realtor calling me a petty, vindictive asshole and that I'm lucky I'm not getting sued, implying that my landlord probably is getting sued. And furthermore, one or all of them has looked into suing me and were advised against it. The concierge recently told me that nobody has moved into the condo yet, which presents another intoxicating possibility, because the new owners evicted us for their personal use. According to the tenancy law, if they failed to move in within 6 months, they owe me a full year's rent as compensation for a fraudulent eviction. I still haven't bought a place. I ended up unfortunately having to pay a fair bit more in rent to move upstairs in the same building, with a different layout but thankfully much nicer finishings. I have an alert set for the building that tells me if a unit gets listed, I'm ready to make an offer if there is a fixer-upper that comes up for sale. I even have a kitchen that might just fit.